Would you rather be Yamaha than Honda right now?
I think you'd have to say, well, I was going to say yes, but you look at the Constructors' Championship and they're below Honda, which I think would surprise a lot of
That is
people.
surprising.
Yeah, Honda are fourth, so not great, and Yamaha are last in fifth, which is again not where you'd want to be. But just sticking with the Japanese sort of thought for a minute, um, I've said this before on the other podcast I do, where I was saying I'm not sure with the Japanese, and I may be completely wrong, whether it's a cultural thing as to why they're still sort of behind the times in a way of it once worked, it will still work sort of thing. Whereas you look at Aprilia, KTM, and Ducati, all the European manufacturers have tried new things. Ducati spent years with Delinia trying different things. They brought in the aero, the wings. They brought in the ride height device. You know, they've always been these people. Aprilia have got these massive wings that they're using now, different styles to everyone else. And KTM have tried different frames and different chassis. They've been trying them for years. And it's almost like they've been making these steps forwards, which have also involved steps back at the same time. Whereas Honda and Yamaha have just been sort of going along at the same sort of level, and now they've been passed by these Europeans, and it's a bit of a shock to them. Whereas they, in the past, they're just doing the same things that have worked. And I'm not sure if that is the case, but that's just my take on it.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the more interesting. I would love to do a video on this actually. One of the more interesting parallels to draw is like the parallels with Japanese society and where they're at politically and culturally all the time, and where their companies kind of are. And it does translate, I mean, not just into bikes, but into a lot of things. Um, like you see, well, I mean, it's Honda again, but in Formula One, the way that they were with Toyota in Formula One and things like that, um, with that project. And a lot of that was just almost their desire and almost like need to do it their way. It meant that they weren't as successful as they should have been for the amount of money they were spending on their project over there. Um, and then yeah, same. I get like, oh, you see this stuff with like. I mean, I'm very interested in Japan as a country. I've been there a few times, and I it's one of my favorite places to go. So I'm always sort of trying to keep up with what's happening there and stuff like that. And when you see, and at the moment they're like there's like big population decline. Their economy's sort of declining all the time, and then you see their teams now struggling in MotoGP and stuff like that. I think it is a really interesting. I think it does. I mean, you could probably look right into it and be like, "There's no link there," but I think that I definitely is one of the first things that came to my mind as well was that link between the way that they like to culturally the way that they act and the way that they're quite conservative with a lot of things, and once they have their way, they're set in that way. Um, and then the way that it's now obviously happening in MotoGP, where like you said, innovations have gone past them. They're the least likely to innovate out of any of the manufacturers, the Japanese manufacturers. The least likely to make changes to, like you look at Yamaha with the inline four, and I know that would not be an easy thing to change. You can't just go out, oh, go get us a V4. Then it doesn't work that way. But the fact that they've let it get to the point where that's almost been outdated by the progress of the other teams and the other companies. They've let it get to this point instead of being like 10 years ago, we can see where this is going. They just refuse to take that on board, you know? So I definitely think there is something there to what you're saying. And it's something that I find extremely interesting. Um, and yeah, and that's the reason why I still, as bad as the Honda is, where it's almost unrideable, and the Yamaha at least doesn't buck its riders off so often. It Yamaha haven't quite been able to maybe, I don't know, would you say the Honda's quicker? Maybe in Mark's hands it's quicker, and in Rin's at Austin they've obviously showed a bit. So would you prefer to be Honda with all their issues, or Yamaha where you're on the inline four, and to fix that, or to either to make that competitive or switch to a V4 is a huge job. So it's almost, is it more of a job than Honda's like chassis issues and things like that?
See,
Issues with losing their riders and things. So, where would you rather be? I still am inclined to think All right, well, it's two questions actually. If you're a rider, where would you rather be?
Uh, if I was a rider, I think I'd rather be on a Yamaha still. And I was going to
Because
say,
you won't end up in hospital.
yeah, I won't end up. Well, unless you're Fabio, he's in hospital at the moment.
He's done that to himself,
Yeah,
hasn't he?
but no, I was going to say just because you asked me before, who would I rather be, Yamaha or Honda? I think Honda's situation is from the top. Like it's at the top end where things were going wrong. That old, I can't remember what job he was in, but that old sort of director sort of disappeared about April time. Um, Most likely been let go by Honda, but they haven't really ever acknowledged it. They've changed a lot of their top end staff. They've had a lot of meetings with them, and I was actually just before this listening to an interview with Alberto Puig, where he said, "I'm here in Europe, and whatever they're doing in Japan, I don't know," which I found really interesting that someone of Puig's standards in that team doesn't know what's going on in Japan. And it's almost like the communication's broken down between Europe and Japan, and they just seem lost from the top to the bottom. Whereas Yamaha, I think the fundamental issue is just the bike.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's not company wide
yeah. I don't think it's
corporate structure
yeah.
and yeah.
I don't think you can trace
Yeah.
it. I think Lynn Jarvis is doing a good job there at Yamaha. I think Maya Marigali's doing a good job there. But then you look at Honda, and there's the thing of they're having meetings with Aoyama and Watanabe. Puig wasn't mentioned in any of these meetings, which I found interesting. Maybe he might be
And this
gone.
again, I
So
think goes into that cultural thing where
yeah,
it's like they keep it in house. It's
mm,
just the Japanese guys that are
yeah,
all in on all the decision making and things like that.
yeah. Mark held this big meeting with Watanabe and Aoyama, and not with Puig there, which seems weird because Puig is always in Mark's corner as soon as Mark comes back into the garage. So again, it's that communication thing. I think there is a massive communication gap between the European and the Japanese side of Honda at the moment in MotoGP, which is letting them down.
And I I've always maintained I'd probably rather be in Yamaha's position. Um, I think, like you said, it is slightly more manageable because there's a bit more cohesiveness as a company, as well as the bike. There's always been something there with the Yamaha that if it's always been extremely rideable, you know, and allows you to push on it. So that fundamental doesn't go away. You just need to find where it is you're lacking, I guess. Honda's is a mess. Honda is, like you mentioned, the way, you know, people leaving roles and we don't know and things like that. The bike's a mess. It is all a bit of a mess.